Hi, everyone. This is Jerry Schnoor at the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research. And I'd like to talk today about the climate crisis. People ask the question, is it a climate crisis? Let's look at some recent extreme events in Iowa and see what we think. Even since I began being a professor, we've succeeded in warming the atmosphere. If you can see my cursor here, about 50 miles of atmosphere. It's not actually a very big reservoir. We've succeeded in warming that, and in turn warmed the land and the oceans, and even acidified the entire oceans in one person's working career. At the moment, we have wildfires in California. We have hurricanes in the Gulf. We have floods in the northeastern United States, and the worst flooding in 1,000 years in Germany and Belgium and in Europe currently. So let's talk about whether it's a climate crisis with regards to specifically this state right here in the middle called Iowa. The main problem globally is that these red arrows of burning coal, oil, and natural gas and clearing land and burning the materials on the land, these red arrows are carbon dioxide going up into the atmosphere, and they're larger than these black arrows of the carbon dioxide being absorbed by oceans. As long as the red is bigger than the black, we accumulate carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's a potent greenhouse gas, which causes the energy balance to change, kind of like putting a blanket over the earth and warming the atmosphere. That's our problem. That means that global carbon dioxide has gone up through time here since 1960 to almost present. It's about 415 parts per million by volume right now. It was 280 before we started to burn that coal, oil, and natural gas. Most of about 2/3 of the greenhouse gas effect caused by humans is due to carbon dioxide. So we'll concentrate on that today. When you have an important greenhouse gas, which is changing the energy budget and causing the Earth's atmosphere to warm, that means that the temperature average year to year is going to increase. And indeed it has. On the y-axis here, if you consider that maybe in 1880 to 1920, we didn't see very much climate change. If you take that as the average, then the y-axis is the difference from that average, so the so-called anomaly. And you can see that, especially since the 1970s, the average temperature on Earth has gone up, 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 up. And so that now we're almost 1.2 degrees Celsius, that's 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than in the norm before we had climate change in 1880 to 1920. 2020 was very nearly the warmest year on record. It rivaled 2016, which is officially the hottest year on record. 10 out of the 10 warmest years on record have all occurred in the last 11 years. Now, for Iowa, the thing that we're most certain about, what has changed, and we have very high confidence, is the precipitation events, the intensity of precipitation events in Iowa. And that's resulted in severe floods in recurring years, 2008, 2011, 2016, 2018, and 19. This is Cedar Rapids and the tremendous damages caused in the 2008 flood when the downtown flooded and 4,000 people were washed out of their homes. This is the way the downtown looked. And you know, what has happened is that the so-called 100-year flood, that which occurs only one in every 100 years, is now a 25-year flood. That means what used to occur one in 100 years now can occur one in 25 years. That's how climate change has changed the statistics of our flooding. And this we're quite sure about its effects in Iowa. In 2019, we had the unusual event of both the Missouri River on our west and the Mississippi River on our east flooded both. And the Missouri River was a very unusual event in the extent that it started with a record snowpack and was followed with a huge rain event called a bomb cyclone, very rare. And the levees broke, billions of dollars in damages. The interstate highway was flooded, and 200,000 acres of farmland were flooded. But you know what? It happened in 2011 also. Are we supposed to just continue to repair those levees each and every year, knowing that it's going to happen again? In the same year, 2019, my own hometown, Davenport, Iowa, was flooded. You know, Davenport is the largest city on the upper Mississippi that doesn't have a flood wall. And that's because the city decided that they wanted to be close to the river and not cut themselves off from the river. So instead, they bought HESCO barriers, temporary flood walls that they could put up during a flood event. And they did that in 2019, but the river was crested for over 70 days at record stage. And finally, after 51 days, the temporary barriers, which you can almost see here, gave way and the downtown flooded. Similar event happened in Burlington, Iowa. Another extreme event, which we're experiencing in Iowa now, are these polar vortexes. And believe it or not, it gets so cold, you would think, how can that be global warming? But it is actually a sign of global warming. The cold air in the Arctic becomes unstable because it's warmer than normal. And it causes the jet stream to allow the cold Arctic air to escape all the way down, yes, to Iowa. It happened in 2019. It's happened more and more with greater and greater occurrence and frequency in recent years. On this particular event in 2019, near Iowa City, we had 54 degrees Fahrenheit below wind chill factor. The polar vortex in 2021 has become infamous because it went all the way down to Texas, shown here, and temperatures as low as 40 degrees below Fahrenheit were recorded in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and that went down all the way to Texas, where they had massive energy infrastructure failures. People died. Lack of insulation and hardening of their energy infrastructure is the main reason, and teaches us that we have to adapt to climate change, which is already here and going to get worse, as well as mitigate it. The last event I'd like to talk about today is the derecho in Iowa, August 10th, 2020. It was the largest thunderstorm in recorded history. We measured winds, continuous winds up to 126 miles per hour. That's equivalent to an EF2 tornado. But as you can see from the graphic here, it was an EF2 tornado equivalent of more than 100 miles wide and 700 miles long, if you can imagine. The wind gusts were up to 140 miles per hour estimated. In Cedar Rapids was about the epicenter of the event. Half of all the trees are gone in Cedar Rapids. The $11 billion in damages, second in national history, only to Hurricane Laura, which was in Lake Charles, Louisiana, about 2 or 3 weeks later. Derechos are so rare, it's difficult to do what we call affirmation science, and that is to directly say that this event was due to climate change. But the intense precipitation, we do feel very confident that that is clearly due to climate change. So to conclude, we ask again the question, is it a climate crisis? And I think the answer is clearly yes. Even in Iowa, we have evidence that we're in a climate crisis. It's going to get worse if we don't make our emissions decrease, if they don't fall rapidly. I'm Jerry Schnoor from the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research. Thanks a lot for listening.